Hey guys, happy Halloween. I want vocal technique of the week. I'd like to do vibrato, if that's cool. Here's the way I like to talk about vibrato. Vibrato, when it's working in the right place, happens inside the larynx. It's not from the jaw shaking, like a Whitney Houston thing, or head shaking. You see sometimes Stevie Wonder or lots of other singers, or shaking your abdomen, like actually Placido Domingo. You'll see that in some of his videos. That like shaking abs. When vibrato is happening right, or in the most consistent place in our bodies, although you will see it sometimes in those, other cases being used professionally, you can point at, but we don't want to teach that. The freest place for it to happen is if we pop out the larynx and look at it from the top, the vocal folds, when you're breathing, they're open. When you go to sing, they vibrate. The muscle that changes pitch, it's the cricothyroid muscle. Cricothyroid. By the way, I have a voice anatomy video I'll share too, or singing anatomy too, that talks about these muscles. But it's a cricothyroid muscle that stretches inside of the larynx for women around 6 to 8 times a second, and for men around 4 to 6 times a second, just because of the size of the vocal folds. If your vibrato's outside of the parameters on the too fast side, that's called a tremolo. It's like that, really fast. If it's too slow, that's called a wobble. Wobble can happen when there's vocal damage. It's somebody's really pressing on the voice hard for years and years, like Liza Minnelli. What God, like her voice after, well, there's lots of things that cause her voice to get to fatigue and have damage, other than just singing. But high pressure on the vocal folds is one of the things that just stretches, and the vocal folds lose their tight, the tension and their elasticity to keep the vibrato fast. So a wobble can happen by excessively pressing the vocal folds, or just over time, naturally, age can, cause a wobble. I mean, you hear really mature singers, 70, 80 years old, sometimes 90, have wobbles. However, I don't know if can't say that that's a thing that's an absolute with age, because I had a 78-year-old bass baritone that worked with me who has, and I believe he might be pushing late 80s and still singing, and last I knew his vibrato was still well within that 4 to 6 times a second that that you would want a man to have, or he would have a wobble if he was slower. He was, like his vibrato was fast, and into his early 80s that I can recall. So I can't say it is. It may be something that we can train away so that people don't get stuck into wobbles. Because I have had adult students who, they did have a wobble that we were able to, through working on like moving air and really releasing and getting their voice liberated, to get the wobble to go away and to sort of reanimate the vibrato into a speed that was appropriate. However, sometimes there can be damage. That can be a sign of damage. Anyway, that's kind of a side topic. Tremolo is usually on the other side, as far as an issue. Usually a result of an overly pressurized abdominal area when they're singing, and so the abdomen shakes, and it's almost like if you think about those old tappers in the old movies, how they go and do those like nerve taps with their tap shoes. It's almost like the abdomen's doing that. It's like there's a shaking. Either it's there, or maybe some muscle in the larynx is really tight and holding on and just like fluttering like that. But some muscle in the mechanism is doing that, is doing an overloaded nervous shaking thing to cause the tremolo. And you'll find a vibrato, when you have someone with a tremolo, will naturally slow down as their body releases whatever tension's going on in there, because you'll eventually figure out whatever muscle is doing the fluttering as they keep releasing. Yeah, vibrato, more stuff about vibrato. Vibrato is an indicator of freedom of sound. If somebody's singing, especially in classical music, where vibrato is welcomed all the time, once you'll hear like a bobble sometimes in a vibrato, like it just has a little jump for a minute, or a catch. That can be an indication that the soft palate dropped, or the voice was overpressurized and the vocal folds couldn't maintain the evenness of the vibrato, so it's like there's like a hiccup for a second, because the chords are just constantly being driven, over pressurized. Vibrato in classical singing becomes very much a tool from a pedagogical standpoint of you just listen for where there's inconsistencies in it, and those are big indicators that something is stuck, you know. So just keep that in mind with vibrato, and just also be really aware in teaching it when you talk about appropriateness to it, you know. Inside of the pop world, you're going to hear that there are some singers that have straight tone almost all the time. Very rarely do they let it in at all. It's like a pop thing. You kind of let the note fall off the end. Da 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 da. It doesn't do any ooh, like a slow ooh, like a little wiggle. And I really like. When we're working on this stuff, I always want to point to real world examples with people. We all have YouTube. We all have recordings and things. And I want to look at like what, you know, when this topic comes up in a song, or we're looking at a style, I want to, you know, bring it up. For instance, in the pop world, Kelly Clarkson, if you ever listen to how much she has, a lot of vibrato in her pop singing. Then the bed is warmer. Like she puts a din in here alone. She'll put vibrato in the middle of the phrases. But then other pop singers, they're straight tone till the very end, you know. So that style, that genre has a lot of latitude. But the kind of vibrato is particular. Like her vibrato doesn't have a wide pitch variation in it, or it doesn't have a very slow amp. It's not 6 times a second. It's on the higher side. And so that's something else to say about vibrato. If here's a pitch in A, ooh, let's say that's whatever note that is. As we sing, a vibrato that's going to create an accurate representation of being in tune to someone hearing it needs to go evenly up and down over whatever the actual pitch is. So if here's an A, that vibrato, if we're mapping it, needs to evenly go up and down. Sometimes a singer can think they're in tune because the top oscillation of their vibrato is hitting the pitch and the bottom isn't. So what happens is they think they're in tune, but the thing they need to know is that it's the average of the top and bottom of that peak wave of the vibration that tells us what the pitch is, okay? It's the average. So, like if here's a note, and my vibrato is just hitting it with the top, that can confuse. And that happens, that type of thing happens where you think you're in tune, but you're not until you listen back, you're like, wait, I swear I could hear it. That happens a lot of times at passaggi or transitions, like upper register for women, B, natural, C, that bridge way up high. There will be times where you just won't know, you know, the vibrato will be, you definitely are hitting the pitch, but you're on that bridge of registers and it's like either too high or too low in your ear. Anyway, so that's another thing to be said about vibrato, is that there, you know, we're talking about this up and down in pitch, as well as this increase and decrease in amplitude or volume level. Each time the vibrato is up, there's a push of air, and then there's a release of air, woo, 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 like that. So the vocal folds are really doing some interesting things there, and you have to just make sure there can be a tendency, because of that air, that the abdomen starts laboring with that, woo, 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 woo. And just make sure that when you're working on vibrato with people and you're teaching it, that you keep a real awareness that their abs aren't shaking, you know, or just anywhere in their body that they're not shaking, and that the vibrato is really a result of some internal laryngeal thing. Seeing the larynx wiggle in there, that's a fine thing. That means the cricothyroid's doing its thing. If you see the tongue wiggle, that's fine too, because the tongue goes down and is attached to this mechanism. So that shaking is fine. When that jaw shakes, that means that that's something we don't want. That means there's tension in these muscles. They're called the strap muscles, and they come and they weave through and they hook all around. It's kind of a comedy that these muscles are supposed to be free when we're singing. But when we see jaw tension, or when we see that happening, the vibrato, the cricothyroid's doing its thing, but because there's so much tension around here, that movement that's happening in there is causing the whole mechanism to start shaking with it, because the jaw is like this, and it's like, oh. So keeping that jaw really released is important when you're working on vibrato. You'll see kids doing the same thing with tension in the back of their neck too. Just keep it super, super loose back there. I always talk about, imagine they're like a bobblehead when they're singing. You know, really loose back there, okay? And, God, so much to say about vibrato. In teaching vibrato, you know, there are some camps of teaching that say, don't talk about it, it'll happen naturally. I'm in the world of voice pedagogy, pretty strong opinions about it. And then there are others that are like, go ahead, it's something that's learned. I'm kind of in the middle of that, in that I believe it's something you create an environment for it to happen. Okay, it's at least in the preliminary phase, and then it does become very much a controllable sensation. So in teaching vibrato, I will say these are some tricks that I use a lot of times with people that don't have vibrato, trying to get them to do it. Let me just get, because this is just for you guys, for my teachers. If I'm talking about for women, like if I have a woman who doesn't have her vibrato working comfortably, I'll find like here's middle C. I'll find that E. I'll go bo bo bo, and get them to breathe in between each of those. Bo bo bo, and in the in the breathing in between, bo oh oh. There's something about some brain thing for us with, if you don't have vibrato naturally in control in your instrument, that it will be most likely to rear its head at the end of long-held notes and phrases. So what you're doing essentially with a bow thing like this is you're creating a bunch of ends of notes. Bow, bow, bow. Okay? And so in doing that in the mind of the singer, by breathing in between each one, it's the end of a note. So it keeps prompting them end of note, which sets them up in a mindset which will most likely trigger vibrato to occur, okay, if it hasn't before. Doing it, and the range is important. I picked E, C sharp, A. That's right around the bridge of chest to head. It's right in that range that you want to just make sure they do it in a very light way. Okay, seems to be the vibrato most likely occurs when it's not there before, when someone's in a pretty delicate, like 3 out of 10 energy level on their singing. Bo, bo, bo. And there may not only be like 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 6, that they'll get that little wiggle. And then when you get that wiggle, provided they're not shaking their body, which a lot of times they'll shake their stomach first, when they get that little wiggle, then you just reinforce, say, see, that's it. Feel that. And then a lot of times they'll say, it just feels like a fluttering in there, like there's butterflies in my throat. You know, like I've heard that a lot. And you just feel like this, you know, this kind of wiggly feeling, okay? And then you just get them to play with that. And I've seen it really happen fast with people. Sometimes I've seen it take several months for it to stabilize. For guys, same thing, an octave lower. Bo, bo, bo. Somewhere in their like conversational range where they can be really light and easy, all right? Another thing to think about with this, there is also not only a tendency for vibrato to come in people's voices who don't have it at the times when they're in an easy and a more relaxed sort of lower state of their voice, but there also is a tendency for it to come when going from a pressurized environment to a less pressurized environment. Like, bo, I'm pressurized a little more and now I'm releasing. Like sort of going from an energetic sound to a less energetic sound. A, oh, oh, energy release. There's something about releasing of energy that vibrato just likely rears its head. And what we're trying to do is to create opportunities for vibrato to occur for people, and then when they experience that sensation enough, it becomes something they can feel or feel. They can turn it on or off, okay? It becomes just a coordination in that respect. So yes, we're, you know, no, we're not making them shake their larynx. You know, you don't want to do that. But we're also not just ignoring the topic and letting it happen as if it's going to take care of itself. I mean, it's very much a part of singing and a very much a part of, it's a huge stylistic function, as well as a way to free up the voice from tension. Once it's understood and able to be turned on and off, like I said, in classical, it becomes a big barometer for freedom. A lot of times when I have people stuck on high notes, I'll make them spin up to it with vibrato, and just by having their mind on vibrato, it forces them into a posture of freedom from tension, because you have to be so free to get that cricothyroid fluttering 6 to 8 times a second. It takes a certain amount of freedom in there. So to get to a high note, a lot of times I'll get that vibrato fluttering, and I'll just wiggle it up, and all of a sudden they'll be able to wiggle up to a higher note than they could before, because they're focusing on the freedom, because they're focusing on the vibrato, which is creating freedom, as opposed to, oh shit, I'm going for a high note. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, vibrato is a crazy tool and an important thing to talk about. So that's the technique of the week. I'd like you guys to just start exploring and seeing where your students are at as far as the coordination of it goes, and see how they're doing with it, okay? And just begin maybe trying the bow, see if you can activate it, okay? All right? Thanks.